Alright, so while we've discovered that Lightroom can be a really powerful tool for organizing and cataloging our images, I'm sure we're all ready to dive into the fun part, which is the editing of our photos, making our photos look a little bit better, spicing them up a bit from how they came out of the camera. That is one of the reasons that we shot in RAW, is because of all of the ability that we're going to have in Lightroom to actually change your files. So remember, all the editing that we do in Lightroom is what's called non-destructive editing. So what that means is, as you do these edits, you're not actually changing the original source file, because remember, that source file lives in your source folder, that RAWs folder that's on your external hard drive. What you're doing is, you're going to be editing the preview that exists in Lightroom of that photo. And then once you're done and you want to export your photo with those edits, Lightroom is going to create a brand new file that's part of the raw image and part of the edits. Both of those things are going to exist simultaneously. So that is what non-destructive editing is. If some of you have experience using Photoshop, Photoshop is what's called destructive editing because you're actually changing the pixel makeup of the image. So the other really powerful thing about editing in Lightroom is if you go and make a mistake or you make an edit and a year down the road you decide you don't like that edit, you can go back and change it. Where in Photoshop, if you make an edit and you flatten your image and you come back a year later, that's gone. You can't really go back and change it unless you saved a previous version of the photo. So let's jump into the develop module. So I'm going to leave the library module and click over to the develop module. So notice that I have the navigator over here still, and I have my film strip down here. It opened with whatever photo I had selected in library. I can still navigate around to all of my photos. I can also just go out to the library tab, and I actually have a folder set aside for my edited photos, but you don't have to do that. So I'm just going to grab a photo to start editing with. Let's say, I'm going to start with this one of, oh, actually I'm going to go with this one of this tree here. So here we have a photo that I took on a hike up in northern Arizona, and we are going to jump into the develop module. So you can always skip back and forth between the library and develop module to find pictures, or you can always just use the film strip down here and scroll through it however you want to do it. Oop, I just hit it. You can hit this little arrow button to hide your film strip if you want. Same thing with the menus up here. We can click this and hide or expand. I don't really think it's that big of a deal either way. Okay, so you guys have already watched the video about the histogram. So here's our histogram right here. This is a pretty good exposure. This histogram is pretty large. It has all of this information. I went grocery shopping for all this tonality, and it all exists in the shopping cart of my histogram. Remember, you can hover your cursor over the histogram and see what part is what on the histogram and how it relates to the image. So over here are my blacks, shadows. In Lightroom, it's called exposures. I call it midtones. Over here is highlights and whites as you move across. So we're going to get editing on this photo right here. The first thing that I want to show you is how to crop your image. So if you are the type of person that likes to hit buttons, here is the crop overlay right here. Or you can use the keyboard shortcut R and it will launch the crop tool. And once you have the crop tool open, it exists right here. You have aspect ratio and angle. These are all things that you can fix. So now we're going to dive into the thought of aspect ratios. So every photo, or every rectangle, every square, has an aspect ratio. That's the relationship between the horizontal side of the photo and the vertical side. We want those things to remain consistent from photo to photo. Your cameras have an aspect ratio. It's usually an aspect ratio of 2 to 3. So if we go over here, we can pick an aspect ratio. So original is your original aspect ratio. Let's actually go down and see 2 to 3 and see if that is what what my camera shoots at. Yep, it is, because it didn't change. This is your bounding box right here. You could, if we go and take this and hit custom, we could crop this photo any way we want, right? We probably don't want to make some weird crop. And so we want to use, so let's go back to as shot. We want to use a normal aspect ratio. When I say normal, I mean, oh, actually, let me unlock this guy. There's 1:1. So a 1:1 aspect ratio would be a square, right? 1 unit of measure across the height is 1 unit of measure on the vertical and horizontal. 4:5, 8:10, that's a pretty traditional film aspect ratio. You could do 8.5:11 to fit photo paper, 5:7 to fit a frame, 2:3, which is our original one. And remember, we can always go change it from this way to that way, or let's see what else we got. And here's other ones, like preset ones. We don't want to mess with those. So let's just keep it here. So what I don't want you to do is use custom. So in your photo projects, I want you to maintain consistency with your aspect ratio. If you don't have a preference, I would say just stick to the original. That will keep it so that no matter how you crop your image, it will stay the original aspect ratio. So I don't like this little branch hanging in from the top, so I'm going to crop my photo just a little bit. So I'm just going to drag in to like right there. Now when I did that, it's going to make my photo smaller, but the relationship between the height and the width has remained the same, which means the aspect ratio is the same. Once you have the crop where you want, you can just hit done or return on your keyboard, and there you go. So the good thing about this is, if I were to shut down Lightroom, go away for 2 years, come back and say, oh, I like this photo, but why did I crop it this way? I could go back, hit the crop tool, and change the crop. I could go back to the original if I wanted, because remember, it's non-destructive. I do like the crop, so I'm going to just drag it in like that. And I actually want to keep that tree right in the middle, so I'm going to drag the crop over like that. That looks good to me right there. So I'm going to hit return. That's my crop. All right, let's jump back into the crop menu because I want to talk about how we can rotate our pictures. So one thing that really bothers me about this photo is this tree is a little crooked. So that kind of bothers me. So I could go down here to angle, and I could take the slider and go left and right. And when I do that, we get this grid line over the top of my photo that I can then orientate the tree to the verticals in the grid and say, yep, that looks good to me. I'm going to go and double click this so we go back to the beginning. So in all of these tools, if you want to go back to the step before, you can double click the name. So if I was to take this and make it like that and be like, oh, I don't like that, I could double click angle, and now I'm back to the original. So that's one way to straighten your image. The other way is to grab this little level right here, and you can drag this level. You can click and drag this level across a vertical or horizontal, and it's going to then rotate your photo based on making this a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to let go, and now my tree is standing upright. If I hit return or done down here, it will apply that change. That looks good to me. How you don't ever want to use this little angle tool, I actually use this all the time, is you don't want to do it over a little area like this, right? Because it's creating a straight right angle based on how long you draw this. So if you have a long line like this tree, really extend it across at least half of the frame like that. This also is really helpful for horizons. So let me go and try to find a photo with a crooked horizon. Oh, here's one right here. Right, so this seems a little crooked to me, how this sits. Actually, let's actually see a different photo here. I always do this with my photos. All right. It's, especially with a small DSLR camera or a mirrorless camera, it's really easy to get crooked horizons because you're probably not shooting using a tripod. And if you are, you're probably not using a level to make sure your camera is level. Not a big deal. So I'm going to grab this. I see that the water line is a little bit crooked here. So I'm going to grab the angle tool, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to drag across the water line, and hit return. And now it's straightened my horizon. So I think that's a really useful tool. I'm going to go back to my tree photo. All right. So once again, because this is non-destructive editing, anytime I open the crop tool, I can then go and change any of this stuff I want. So when I did straighten my image, I did notice that this little bit of information of the tree pops in the top of the frame, and I do want to get rid of that. So the other thing about cropping to keep in mind is when you do crop your image, you are losing digital information, right? you are making your file smaller. And remember, the rule with digital information is you can always take something big and make it small, but you can't take something small and make it big. So, the reason I say that is if you wanted to have this photo look like this, you wouldn't want to crop it down to that because it would be way too small of a file to do anything with, and it's going to deteriorate and not be very high quality. You'd want to shoot your photo like that. Now, with that said, you can crop like this, right? That's still losing information. You're going to have a smaller file, but it's not that big of a deal because we're just going to miss these edge pieces. So, that's the crop tool and straighten tool. It's really useful to use. The next video, we're going to jump into the basic tab, which is right here. So I'll see you then.